Lurppis. I know nothing about Counter-Strike, but then again, neither does Thorin. Welcome to his YouTube channel.
One of the big events in Australis was you went to that second season of the World Esports Games. So this time you got to go to, I think it was also in Korea, this one, if people remember. And this was another one where it's like a unique setup. Like it isn't just like a 1 week tournament or whatever, 3-day tournament like CPLs. You go and you basically stay in like a little chalet, in like a little village basically, and you just stay there for like a month or something. I think the games were even televised on Korean TV or something. And the weird thing about this one was, this is one where if anyone goes back, I remember the story you told me was that like, cause you just live in there and you're there for the whole month, you have all this like practice room and stuff. It's like in the actual practices, this team was really good, right? It's just in the actual matches, something went wrong and you weren't able to win the event or have the deep placing.
Yeah. I mean, the circumstances there were, in hindsight, perfect. We had our practice rooms like similar way as you have today in like any S tier event. Like you said, we went to a studio to play the games. I think we played them pretty early. Then they were recorded and then showed on TV later in Korea. I remember us watching the games in the evening, like at Korean barbecue and things like that. But again, like still the classic Finnish plague just being there. There were just some players that were not able to like perform in the LAN environment. And I can't pinpoint what it was exactly. Like I could see like we were practicing in LAN, like there was no funny business and everything. Like they were playing really, really well. But then when the pressure was on, some of the players just kind of disappeared or were not taking the similar risks they would take otherwise. I think of players like Bloodar, for example, who actually, fun fact, I played a pub LAN tournament with him this year. And we won, by the way.
Oh, okay.
And he was very good on LAN. So maybe he needed to mature another 20 years to really become he had some glimpses. He had some good moments. Like even earlier in his career, I remember like the ESWC, they won the qualifier too. With one of those that we lost with Destiny's Skyline. I remember him having like good moments, but I think it was him and a couple others that kind of had these struggles in that environment. And also like maybe we couldn't handle the whole month in Korea as well, because it was like a weird one. We were there living in these extended stay hotels where our life was basically sleep, play CS, get some food, and then eventually, as we were long enough there, people started going to bars and doing things they maybe necessarily shouldn't be doing when they're competing in a tournament. So I think we were also not very smart always when it comes to like being at our peak performance.
After this, as you referenced earlier, you actually got to be one of the early players to go and have what now we call, fully of ENCE itself, is it an international team? Back then, aside from NOA, which by the way only worked because they had, well, they didn't turn out the big sponsors, but they thought they had big sponsors and obviously had the best players in the world, so they thought they were going to win the tournament, and they could sometimes. For a team like this, though, what's funny is Four Kings was one of the early teams because they had an amazing sponsorship. I think they just had Intel, if people don't know back then. They actually, the joke was, even when they weren't like a top 5 team or something, they could already pay like a salary that was like equivalent to top 5 in the world or something. So I know when you joined this team, in a way, you joined kind of as a hired gun, right? You just came in and it was the team that had so they had the UK players, Harryman and Mangiacapra or whatever, but then they would have a Swedish player and maybe they'd have Dave from Norway or something. They had like an interesting mix of players in these teams. Mm-hmm. Do you remember joining this team? Was it just you got a good offer and you joined? How does this happen?
I think I got frustrated with the Finnish guys and we're not delivering results. After having that good 2004 with Destiny's Skyline, and then just felt like it was a disappointment after disappointment with the Australis team. The opportunity came across again because I had always been social media, also knew these guys, at tournaments. I'd been talking to them and their managers and, just casually, nothing I wasn't trying to sell myself or anything. But I think, knowing how I am as a player and then also already knowing how I was as a person, they reached out to me because I think Red was either retiring or he was, I don't know, he was just out of the team. And also the big factor for me was the fact that I was supposed to be playing with Element. And he was a guy that I really looked up to. For me, one of the GOATs of 1.6, a very, very smart guy with a very, very unique sense of humor, a cool Norwegian guy for those that don't know. and just an insanely skilled individual, and also a multi-talent who could AWP, who could IGL, who could do everything in the game basically. So he was the big selling point for me. But fun fact, never got to play a single match with him because he ended up missing like 4 flights from LA. It was not the best of times.
He must have been having a good time in a way. In 2 ways. In a real sense, yeah. But it sounds like he was having too good a time, if you know what I mean. At the same.
Well, I think there might be connections between a certain NOA manager, Gary. I think it was Gary Sanchez, yes. And some money gone missing, and there might be a connection. I'm not making any allegations here. I'm just assuming. And this is already 20 years ago, so the crime's already passed. So whatever. But yeah, unfortunately, didn't get to play with him. I think that's when a day came into the picture. It was. I think originally it was me. It was Mangiacapra, Akuji, a day. Goodfella, yeah. Yep. Also an amazing guy, an amazing player. That was the 5. A lot of fun, like you said. They get the first time I got an actual salary playing CS. I think it was with how I think it was like £500, which was like €1,000 at the time.
It's pretty legit.
Pound is very strong. So for me, especially like we mentioned earlier, in my living conditions, that was a good situation to be in. Especially if we win some money on top from tournaments and whatnot. But for me, it was just I felt like it was a natural progression. I always felt it that I wanted to go play in an international team, try and go play with players from different nationalities, because I always felt, like I said prior, that I was always super focused, like super into it, and putting myself out there to try and be the best version of myself in the game. And I never felt like my peers in Finland were doing that. So I kind of already had that idea in my head. I even tried to make my way into Game Online back in the day when Musa was playing there, but his teammates wouldn't give me a chance. So yeah, for me it was natural just to go there, and of course it helped that I actually got some salary from playing.
Right, at the time, even though UK teams, I mean, this one could be decent. It was sort of like a team that could make like a top 8 or something if it had a good run. And obviously, like we're saying, it had some mercenaries from Scandinavia. The big name from the UK, obviously, was Mangiacapra at the time. He was considered like the default best UK player, basically almost his entire career, as far as I know. What was this guy like? Because he was a person who wasn't a very public guy. He never really did interviews or anything. So what was Mangiacapra like?
Very fun also. I think I've had a lot of fun teammates, but Mangiacapra definitely among those guys. I think I got along with Mark really, really well. Actually, he lived in my place as well, so I've had quite a bit of Counter-Strike history in that apartment. Fun fact, we discussed it with the team that maybe Mark should come over to my place to kind of learn what it means to actually grind CS. By the way, ended up him playing Dota and like all these other different games.
Unfortunately, the UK players were notorious for like not playing CS when they didn't have to play it, right?
While I was next to him playing like tons of Counter-Strike, he was just like playing whatever the Dota, like it was the Warcraft mod at the time,
All Stars,
right? Yeah. I remember playing one game and went like 0-15 and decided I'm never touching this game again. And went back to Counter-Strike. But yeah, no, a very laid back guy, a bit lazy. I think that was his demise, because if he had put a bit more effort into it, he could have been a lot better, like even much better than what he was. I think one of the reasons why eventually we ended up cutting him from the team. So yeah, a lazy fucker, but a good guy, and on his prime and on his day, a very, very good player as well.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'm just looking up where... Yeah, basically, you referenced this story earlier, but I'll ask about it now. So you went to the CPL that was in the summer. It was the one that was rebranded as WSVG in that Gaylord facility, which, by the way, really is what it was called. Just whatever, just look it up. We're not making that up. That was the name. That's the name. That's probably still called that now. It's in Texas.
If you look it up, it's probably...
It's got to be. It's a massive... It was actually a pretty cool venue, yeah. And basically, at this tournament, like you said... This is the one where in the upper bracket, you lost actually quite early to Fnatic, but you came fourth, but you had to do a ridiculous run. And let me count. I think you lost to Fnatic both times. I think you had to win like 5 lower bracket matches to get back there and come fourth. Like, fucking hell, mate. And you're just going through everyone. You're having to play everyone you can imagine at this point. Like, this sounds like an epic tournament.
That was the one I was referencing to as well, where we had to play like 4 or 5 games in a day. And that was where we lost to Fnatic in the end. I think that was even a pretty close game, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, this is the good Fnatic with Forrest and all those guys we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. I think they went to the final, but they lost maybe.
They came third. It was complexity and attacks in the final.
Okay, yeah, might be. But yeah, that was when we got 80 in the team as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Who, by the way, has tragically passed away since then, in case people don't know.
Yeah.
But he was a good player, though.
Super sick. Like, he was so much unlike any of the other British guys, like a workaholic, just you could just tell he was a natural gamer. I think he had been playing in the second best team in the UK. I can't remember what they were called for quite a while. That we always beat with 4K in the qualifiers. So he never really had the chance to like get to the big tournaments up until the point where we signed him to the team. But yeah, I mean, that tournament in general was just crazy. And I remember I don't think if there's any stats available, but I remember having some really, really good games in that tournament as well. Like it was, I think, one of my 1.6 primes, perhaps that time, 06, where I already was, 4 or 5 years into my career. I had already played like a shit ton of LAN tournaments, so I could really like put all those things together. And we had a solid team as well. Day also, someone that I already quickly mentioned, also a very, very skilled, versatile player. Also maybe had a bit of an issue when it comes to the mentality side of things, raging a bit too much and getting hung up on himself a bit too much, but a very, very good player to play with. And overall, yeah, for sure, like one of the early career highlights, even if we only came fourth or whatever. But because of that grind, as you mentioned, like the grind we went through, like super, like I don't even know how we made that happen, because in such a short amount of time, you just play match after match after match after match, and then you just quickly go grab something to eat. And maybe you even forget to eat at some point, and then you lose just out of not having any steam left in your body to perform.
Right, as you say, in this team, people were a bit lazy and it was up and down the results. And so eventually, the next year, what you did is you came back to Finland and you joined basically Lurppis and naSu's team, which had already become really good, and it became the famous 68N 2080, which, by the way, even though I'm the sort of nutter who remembers that particular thing, that marketing campaign could have been genius. It's just, here's the problem, guys. The reason the team was called that is it was actually Rock Art secretly. But what they did is they called it 68, because if you put that into like Google, that was like fucking, what do you call it, latitude, longitude coordinates, and it would take you to like a fucking lake in Finland or something, and it was like, what's there, what's under the lake or whatever, and then sadly it just turned out it was like a new energy drink or something. Like, you know what I mean? Like, look, it could have been really cool, but look, so essentially there was money behind this project is what we're saying. It actually had probably money as well, right?
Yeah. I think there were similar people to MTW.
Right.
Behind this project. I mean, Rocket, which then became a peripheral company, which exists today.
Yeah.
And that was the launch campaign. And I think one of the early like kind of marketing thing was an energy drink. You're right.
Something like that, right?
That. Yeah. I forgot about that altogether. But yeah, it ended up being the peripherals company. And this team and how I ended up there, I think, was because Tonpa, who was their fifth player, either they wanted to get rid of him or he just wanted to quit. And I got tired of the bullshit again of some of the guys in the 4K lineup. The same story, like people not putting enough effort in. I felt like, I need to find a different place to find where, like-minded guys. And we never really like kept Lurppis, naSu, and those guys. Like, we didn't think of them too highly earlier when they had the team called Wings and whatnot. But then also, I think at the same time, I realized like these guys grind. Like they have a similar mindset to me, that where they're willing to do the work and go through the road to really make their way through. And they started to kind of having glimpses of some success, and they needed. I think they just wanted to get an upgrade. So they got me into the team, which then became very successful for a short amount of time. Similar issues again, and we referenced these earlier already with the shotgun buys and kind of some ridiculous things that kind of became the demise of the team in some sort, even though the core kept on going for quite a while. But this team could have been insanely successful if only a couple of people could have kept their head straight.
Right. One thing I want to get as like on the record at this point is, In the year before, like you said, your prime was probably like 2003, 2004. If you go look at the results and you go, 2005, maybe 2004, 2006, I'll say that. That's probably like the span I would put. Where you look at the results, these are your teams, you're one of the main players, you're usually the guy who's like a captain figure. But at this era, that was your prime. In this team, though, the 69, you were more of like sort of like just the experienced player, not the star, etc. So give people a sense before that, what sort of player was natu before this team, and then what do you think he did in this team?
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, also the roles in sense were not so defined back in the day as they are. But yeah, I would say like back then in the earlier years, I was kind of the expected fragger, kind of a guy who could multi-kill, who could clutch, and the only thing that I wouldn't do was op. Just stay me away from the op. But other than that, very good with the pistols. Especially early days with the MP5, I was a master of the 1.3 jumping MP5, and then I think also like one of the factors that I ended up being sort of like quote unquote on a more supportive role already in the 07, like those days, was I had a lot of things outside of CS going on in my life that I feel like I wasn't really fully focused on the game. That was like the only time where it felt like factors outside of the game were affecting me as a player and also my contribution and how good I could be as a player and as a teammate, which I think also sort of ended up being one of the reasons why I got kicked from that team late summer, early fall of that year. But who knows? I mean, it could have also just been that the composition of that team was also where there was wacky players like Conte, you had Ruit, you had naSu, like players that were all over the place. So someone kind of had to also take the step back and play a more conservative. Otherwise, I mean, that chaos just wouldn't work unless there was a balancing force. So maybe it was a combination of those things where I took a step back, but also I wasn't the best version of myself at the time either.
You referenced, and we both did in the earlier on, this was obviously, when you joined this team, one of the first tournaments was that Samsung tournament where they swapped the mice, which just gave away a tournament life, which actually could have been valuable since it came like fourth or whatever. But right after that was when this team did kick in again, won all those events. So one of the first events I wanted to reference was, at the time, you have to think, the obvious analogy I'll give to a modern fan is there was a tournament called NGL-One, but it was kind of like Blast. It was like, they had the LAN finals, but it wasn't like a giant LAN final like a CPL. It was like a small one. This one had 4 teams instead of 8. And famously, you had an online season, you would qualify to it. If I just read off the 4 teams, obviously one's yours at this LAN, you'll realise how nuts like the actual like competition could be though. So there was Fnatic with Forrest and Khan and all those guys. I think this year they ended up being like the team of the year, so they were really good. You had SK Gaming, who was just always good. Those were the other Swedes that were really good and always had All-Star, Spawn, fucking Robban, Fisk, all the players everyone knows. There was NOA, which later became MTW, which is obviously a pretty good team. They were in the ESWC and WCG, and then there was your team. And your team won this tournament without actually losing a match. You just won against you beat Fnatic twice and you beat NOA once. And I know for Lurppis, for example, this is actually a tournament he holds in very high regard. It's like a very good memory for him. So it was a big deal to win a tournament like this, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could also compare it to being like a modern, like a at the time pro league sort of.
Right. Yes.
Also, because like there was an online portion to it also, and I do remember that I think that we qualified for this LAN final because of a smoke. Because people, so like there was a 16-bit, 32-bit color setting in 1.6. 16-bit you would have thinner smokes. 32-bit you would have thicker smokes. And in the rules you had to use 32-bit. And I think it was actually 4 Kings after I left.
Okay.
They had a player had been using 16-bit graphics, so you know that was considered a cheat or an advantage. So they got disqualified, and I think we got invited because of that to the Final Four, and then eventually won the whole thing, right? I mean, it was pure chaos the whole tournament because we were not using any TeamSpeak or Ventrilo, whatever people were using at the time. We were yelling. We were like, there's videos on YouTube still you can find where you can see us playing. And it was, let's call it was violent Counter-Strike. It was just literally pure yelling. And I could imagine like how irritating it must have been for the opposing team to be playing like, I don't know, 10, 20 feet ahead of, like on the opposite side of the room that we're playing in. And that was sort of a deliberate way for us to even play because we knew how friggin' annoying it would be for the other team if we were just yelling. And also at the time, you would be using headsets that were not noise canceling, and they were not even isolated in any way. So it was already really tough to hear sounds of the game. And then when you mix up the TeamSpeak to it, it becomes impossible to understand any of the in-game sounds. We even had like specific strats for these tournaments where it was like a noisy environment because you couldn't like hear footsteps all the time and things like that. So fond memories for sure. One of the highlights of my career, the whole stretch with 69 and 20 AE, where we won like three, four events in a row, but that was definitely the biggest with the most prestige. I do remember that we had some tough ones. NOA game was tough. We had a tough start to that game where we still somehow managed to grind it out. And me and Lurppis, I think in hindsight, had some really good chemistry in calling as well. He was the primary caller always, but I was like the second guy. Like I was the guy that would chime in crucial moments, coming up with some ideas. And then we kind of, I don't think we appreciated it enough at the time, like how well that kind of chemistry between us worked. Because he is to this date very opinionated, and also like sometimes a bit too driven. So it's hard for him to also maybe stop and kind of realize what are the reasons why things are working, right? So then eventually what happened was that they cut me, but it was it's probably like prestige wise the biggest win, I guess, in my career as well.
Let me ask about Lurppis then, because as you say, he's another person where it's not the surprise to me you and him are basically the most famous Finnish people, because as you say, you actually were quite different, whereas a lot of them were just like, lol, we're drinking beers, fuck it, who cares, it's only CS anyway, lol, I'm going to quit the game and go off and that, or fucking have a baby with someone or something. People were mad back then in Finland, so it was almost like fucking redneck vibes or some fucking shit. So but you guys were both cut from the same cloth, that you're really serious, you actually wanted to be pros, you even cared about the esports side, like I want to be a legacy player, I wanted people to remember me and to accomplish things, and like you say, as an in-game leader, and they didn't work a lot of in-game leaders back then in Finland, he was trying to do like the proper style of like a captain, and we have strats and people have their roles and stuff, right? He was a serious guy.
Yeah, for sure. I think he's mellowed down a bit now on his older years. Thankfully for his better half. But for sure, a guy very driven, like I mentioned. Sometimes to an extent where it was kind of annoying. So you had to kind of adjust yourself when you were having interactions with him when it comes to Counter-Strike, and also when you were playing, he was so driven to win that it came out quote unquote wrong. Where he would lash on you, even though he didn't mean it in any personal way. He just wanted to win that bad that he kind of said shit that wasn't necessarily the best thing to say during a game, right? To keep the morale of a person, of the morale of the team high. And then when you combine like the insanity of combining players like Ruit, who didn't know what pushing S meant or going backwards in the game. Sure. All he knew was going forward and just trying to get the next frag, and somehow in all that insanity, it kind of just worked because then other guys realized how to compensate, Lurppis included. Was never like super player in terms of individual skill, but he had his moments for sure. Always like a smart guy who was good at positioning and understanding mechanics and the development of the game mechanics very early on. I remember him nagging at me for not jiggle peeking in a certain way when like people started becoming a bit more wise on how to fake an op with your movement and things of that nature. So I remember him persistently like nagging at me for being clumsy with those things because I was more old school, so I had to learn some of the new tricks from the new dogs. But yeah, overall, I think he was one of the few great in-game leaders in the history of Finnish Counter-Strike.
As you said, in this little streak of wins, one of them that won't be remembered by that many people is this is when it started the era that you had all those tournaments in Russia and Ukraine, etc. And so you got to the ASUS Open, and even though it's just all Russian and Ukrainian players basically at the time, like by the way, people like Edward and Zeus are there, it's just nobody knows them at the time, they're not famous, right? When you went to this tournament, which you won fairly easily, I remember one thing I think you told me about this one didn't it have like a crazy like atmosphere or something? Was it like a big stage match or something?
Yeah, it's definitely one of the ones that I remember very vividly. It was like this, like a internet cafe kind of a thing where upstairs was like your typical internet cafe with a lot of computers, and then on the ground floor you would have sort of like this small arena type of a setup where 5 PCs and 5 pieces, and then you had a place for the crowd, and it was friggin' packed. I don't know how many people it fit, but let's say anything between 100 and 200 people. But because the space was so small, it was so freaking loud. They were all yelling, like, I think we were playing against Forza.
I think so, yeah.
Forza, yeah. And they were just yelling, Forza, Forza. So and you imagine we were playing with headsets all the time. So, like, we couldn't hear jack shit. And it was most definitely one of the most insane experiences for me, I remember. Just because of a small space, but with a lot of people just crammed into it, and everyone's just yelling, and obviously every single person against us as well.
Of course. And especially, by the way, as well, if people don't know, even though now it's even worse, but even back then, Russians and Finns, like, there's a bit of history there. Like, of course, we don't want the Finns to win, you know?
Yeah, no, for sure. Even though, like, straight after, fun fact, we were given, I can't remember how much did we win, maybe $7,000 or whatever. It was given to us in a brown envelope, of course, in $100 US dollar
stories. Yes, Paul.
Yep.
I love it. Probably the joke there, if you don't get it, guys, is don't ask where that money came from. You don't need to know. It's just the money was there. That's all that matters.
I mean, we've all managed to convert it to euros, so
right. Okay.
All good. But fun fact also, like after we were given that envelope, then the vodka came through.
Okay.
And, like just outside the venue, like they had this backyard thing, and we were hanging out, and they started bringing vodka bottles and like proper glasses, and they were filling them up. And let's drink. It's time to party. And maybe like after 1 or 2 shots, I told to my guys like, listen, I think we should probably take this envelope to
yes.
one of the safes of one of our rooms before we start drinking more vodka, because, this night might cost us $7,000, pretty soon. Some opportunists might come and try and steal it. So yeah, we were smart enough, thankfully, to realize that we should probably take the money back to the hotel and then commence on the vodka drinking.
Yes. And then after this, there was the WSVG event in Louisville. I know it's a weird place to have an event, just Louisville in like Maryland or whatever the fuck it is. Kentucky, sorry.
Kentucky,
yeah. And basically, this didn't have all the best teams, but had some good ones. It had like SK Gaming with Sport, it had NIP, which still had people like Temple and Valley, and had Mouse Sports, actually had a pretty good lineup back then. And you guys won this tournament as well. By the way, in this era, when you win tournaments, you just win all the matches. You don't even like lose a game. You just go through upper brackets at this point, right?
Yeah. I remember even like in the finals against SK, if I'm not mistaken, or NIP, one of the two. We won. I think it was MR15 already at the time. I think we beat them on train like 16-3 by losing both pistol rounds or something along those lines.
That's wild in 1.6 as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we were just leaps ahead of majority of the competition. We were for sure like in the top 3 conversation in the world at that point in time, for sure.
And then, as you say, the real sad thing is this. The one that would have made this team legendary and confirmed it as number 1 is that ESWC, because that was the one where you lost to Fnatic. And this is the one where I think Fnatic even won that tournament. Let me double check.
Yeah.
Pentagram won it. Sorry, that was the one where Fnatic was top 3 though. Like these were all elite teams. Like basically, like you say, you had them. You had them on the first map. If you'd have won that, you could have at least been a minimum on map 3. This is one of those classic games like you said that was kind of like a what if, right? If you could go back in time now, you just tell them like John Connor, like do it right, you fucking idiot,
Yeah. No, we've talked about this specific match.
Yeah,
with both
it's the big one,
Lurppis
right?
with Lurppis and naSu a bunch of times. Over a cup of coffee somewhere, how did it go so wrong? Like I said, we got 12 or 13 rounds on T-side nuke, which was just unimaginable, and then still managed to lose that map 16-14 or overtime or whatever. And then, of course, our morale was just out the window at that point in time. And it was all due to like people just doing dumb shit, like playing shotguns on yard and like just pushing. We won, like we had this one strat, I think it was called 4K or something, like this city setup. We won 1 round with it, and then back to the shotguns and playing aggressive on yard we went after winning that 1 round with a specific strat that we had agreed to do. So I don't know, what can I say? I wasn't the one running with a shotgun on yard, so I was holding ramp, if I'm not mistaken, just watching the kill feed and being like, okay, well, this is going to be a fun retake.
By the way, one of the things that must have been cool about this era, though, when you were getting the wins at these events and even challenging, like you say, for number one position in the world, is not only was it at the time, no Finnish team had ever been number one, and that wasn't even a thing. Like we said, just to being competitive was a big thing for Finnish teams, but this is still the era when Sweden's the best. So actually, I know, obviously, historically, like in hockey, there's always a massive rivalry between Sweden and Finland. Like it's a big deal to beat the best Swedish teams and beat people like Spawn or Forest, etc., right?
Yeah, especially because of the history. Like at this point in time, there were like the amount of land success was so limited. Like Swedes were dominating on land. Like we were lucky to even be in the same competition or even in the same conversation. So yeah, the rivalry was always there. But Sweden was so ahead of its time at the time because they had these different LAN cafes. You know, they had this league running that was played from these LAN cafes, and it felt like they were a decade ahead of us at the time. And now it's funny to think like what's going on in Sweden right now in terms of esports in big picture, right? But at the time, for sure, like they were the top dogs. We were looked up to them. You know, we wanted to, like I always wanted to establish connection and like a relationship with the guys, the Swedish guys, because of how much I looked up to them. Like even I almost had a chance to play with like SK, Heaton, and Pori, and I can't remember the lineup exactly, but I was 16, so I couldn't go to a tournament and a CPL in Cologne. And what year must have been? It must have been like
2002, maybe.
Maybe I was 16, so I turned 18 2003, so 2001 must have been.
Oh right,
wow. But I couldn't because of my age, right? And then that was a miss-up. Like my whole career story could have gone differently if I managed to get to that tournament that early on, right, and play with them. So who knows? Could have been very, very different.
Wasn't this also after this team when they kicked you out? Wasn't that around the time when you also did another of your insane adventures? One thing I like about your career is you actually did enjoy it all. You didn't just like play with the next best Finnish team. You had that period where you went and played in EPS Germany. I forget which team you played with. Was it MTW? Was that the team you were on?
Yeah.
So basically, if people don't know, back then, EPS Germany was an amazing domestic scene where it had its own like EPL style. Like you get to the LAN finals, it's the 4 teams, it's a GSL style group. It's really competitive. Obviously, you have Mouse Sports with all the famous players, you know, Attacks with Moon and Roman and all those people everyone remembers. And basically, they would allow you. I think you were allowed like 1 or 2 foreigners. It was a bit like how football worked back then, where you could have like you couldn't have the whole team be foreign. Obviously, you had to be German based, but you came as like a foreigner to play in the state. So did it mean did you move there? What was the situation? It sounds interesting.
No, so like I alluded to previously, people behind 69N, 2080 and Rocket there was connection to MPW. So Marcus Fry, I think what's his name? He called me up after I still had my contract valid for 69N when they kicked me out. So he called me up. They was like, hey, I have a wild idea. We need a player in our German EPS MTW team. And would you be interested? And then went back and forth. I asked for a bit of an increase in salary to do it. He agreed, and off I went. I was always the kind of guy like, why not? You know, sounded like a fun experience. Sounded like a fun. I mean, dude, I even played with a Greek team in 2002 or 3. I don't think that's even in any of the history books. Right. But I played a CPL qualifier like in 2002 in Greece with a Greek team. It was basically me just smurfing in a Greek CPL qualifier. Anyway, so it was, like you said, it was kind of like my thing where I'd never like dared any kind of challenge, you know, why not? Because the opportunity was there. Yeah, I still would be getting paid. Sounded like a fun thing to do. But no, I didn't move there. I did spend extended amount of time in, I can't remember which city was it. Maybe it was in Berlin. Okay. And there were like in this EPS system, there was like a LAN final. Yeah, but there were also these, I think what they were called like Friday night. Maybe
it's not like a show match or something, right?
Yeah, no, it was part of the.
Oh, right. It's just like the big marquee matchup, like on TV.
Yeah. It was played like in a cinema.
Ah, right.
Auditorium or something. It was cool to get to play with a different kind of philosophy of Counter-Strike again. You know, Germans were always they had their own very slow kind of a play style. So it was fun to also go experience that and maybe learn something, but also teach something, because at the end of that stint, I became the IGL of MTW to kind of teach them the ways of why Nordic teams have been successful. And actually, we started playing pretty good. The only problem was that they had already decided to release the team. So, which I learned actually during one of these Friday night games. I didn't know German too much. I learned some as we were playing, and I learned like a lot of Counter-Strike German, and then of course like I'm pretty good with languages, so I pick up on things pretty quickly. So I learned on the stage of one of these Friday night games that we were getting kicked because, or not getting extended, because in the interview on the stage before the game, our captain was asked like, so how does it feel you're not going to get a continuation with MTW? And I'm just stood there like, oh, well, that's news to me. So, but it was a fun few months. That was fun few months. I can't remember how long was it, maybe 6 months or something. But again, meeting new people, learning about the different culture of Counter-Strike, because it was so vastly different even within Europe. Like it was very different how people saw CS as a game in different countries. So I thought it was a lot of fun. It wasn't the most competitively enjoyable, but at the same time also just as an experience, it was a lot of fun.
I saw in this team you got to play with the German Neo, the one that was in Mouse Sports. Well, I'm guessing this is like towards the end of his tenure. Was he still a good player?
He was okay. Like he wasn't as good as I remembered from like before when I'd play against him for sure. He was very much towards the tail end of his career, but yeah, he was pretty good. I remember Nuki. I think he later on became, I think he's a streamer now. I don't know if he still does, but he became pretty famous German streamer. There was Ulti, who was Austrian guy, if I'm not mistaken. He was the other import of the lineup, and I think I came in the place of Papst, who was another Austrian player,
right?
To play this season. So yeah, no, good times.
After this, we won't go event by event, but what basically you were on the outs. Obviously, they still had like the really good Finnish teams elsewhere. And what's funny is there was even a period in time, by the way, if people don't know, before Lurppis went to EG, where even he got kicked and he was playing with you and you were still going to the events when you could in like the second Finnish team, which was always a thing back then. You'd have teams where like they'd get a little bit of sponsorship. You could maybe go to like a European tournament or something. And
we were hustling.
I mean, this is like back then. Like, look, if you're in a team like that, you don't really think you're going to win the event. I mean, you don't really have your choice of players, do you? If anyone actually gets good, they're going to fucking get scouted by the other team. But it's like you see, you just play for the sake of playing and trying to have competition and see if you can get the cheeky upset or something, right?
Yeah, and also we were hustling sponsors. Like we were, I think we were sponsored by there was an Portuguese organization called ESL or something. We managed to get them to kind of fund us, and then I think we got a couple of like brands also to chime in a couple of these like Steel Series, or was it Steel? It was already Steel Series at the time.
Q-Pad or something.
We knew some of the people there, whatnot. So they would chime in with a couple of grand to sort our flights and our hotels and stuff. And we loved competing, so we were like, let's put a team together, let's go compete. We could cause it, like you said, we could cause a couple of upsets. If everything goes right, we could actually have a deep run. And so it's just out of our love for competing in Counter-Strike at the time, because I was already this was 2008, right? Or within that time period, I decided to have an actual job and try to kind of take the next step in my life, because Counter-Strike wasn't a viable option to make a career out of at that point in time. So I was, of course, at that point I was already past my early 20s, so felt like I had to kind of make some real life choices. But then I also felt that I still wanted to play and compete, and I've also found more enjoyment in the game, because it wasn't the only thing I was obsessing with anymore. I had other stuff in life, so felt like it was like a healthier kind of a relationship with the game, and going to these tournaments was a shit ton of fun.
Because that leads into when you had the Crack Clan, which was a similar thing. It was the other players not in the big other team. And there's a story here that I have to ask you to relate, because it's one of my favourites of all time. It could be in a movie. Like, basically, because especially, by the way, when there was no natu and no lurppis, if you think it was bad before, guys, these guys, Ruit and Conte and the others, right, they were the most ridiculous, like, this guy did bad, kick him. The other guy did good against us, recruit him. They were the worst ever for doing that, I think. Like, they're just like the short-term thinking guys, right? So believe it or not, eventually, like, Lurppis was kicked. He went to America with EG. naSu eventually just got sick of it. Lurppis' brother was like, fuck it. I think he went and did the army or something, which leads to this story, which is you had a team, but yours on paper should have been way worse than that. They still had Ruit and Conte and fucking Plastain, like the absolute best players in Finland. Like, these, by the way, these are like absolute most skilled players you could have. And in your team, you went to Assembly, the classic Finnish LAN, and And obviously, in every assembly, one thing that's always supposed to happen is the best Finnish team always wins, and then your team's supposed to come second to them, right? And wasn't the story something like naSu really was just like, I think it wasn't something like he hadn't been in contact for 2 weeks or something mental, and like no one knew like, what's he doing? Is he out there? Would he play? But you'd said something like, you'd sent him a message maybe through lurppis or something like, oh, come, if you can, come to this tournament. And it's like a movie. Didn't he sort of come in like the cavalry and just arrive last minute? But then you fucking won the tournament. Like, give me the story on this. It sounds mega.
Yeah, I think it's even wilder than I've ever explained to you or not a lot of people know the full extent of the story because it's like, Jesus. Okay, well, yeah. So yeah, we made a team. Who was it? It was me, naSu, Spike One,
Dream,
T-Hop, and some
eventually.
And T-Hop. Yeah, okay. Maybe that was the 5, right? And then assembly was coming. I mean, we went to a couple of tournaments that summer, game Goon and something else when we were absolute hot garbage. We just, nothing worked. Fun trips, but Counter-Strike wise, it wasn't a lot of fun. So then, it was a WCG Qualifier, maybe the assembly, or if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, it was. Yes, it was. Yes, I think, yes.
Yeah.
Which is also why it's a big deal, because you win the spot to World Cyber Games,
Yeah. So, of course, we'll give it a last hurrah there and see if it goes to shit. Then we'll call it quits with that lineup.
Which is even better for the story. It's like, we'll just retire if we don't win this one. Exactly.
Yeah. And Crack Clan was actually sort of an organization. That was Ben Woodward, who used to be in 4K. Some people might know him nowadays from Code Red Esports.
Yep.
He was our kind of quote unquote manager, and then he assigned me to make a team. And so, anyway, we went to this tournament, and before we went there, we were trying to put up some practice together, and we couldn't get a hold of naSu. I think his phone was off, and I can't remember anymore what the story was that I was told about him. But then we got this guy called Kookas to stand in, and he was a bit weird in the practice already. And then we went to the tournament, and this guy was in a complete, I would call it like a psychosis. From overusing cannabis.
All right.
From what I understood, he was fucking out there. Like I had to literally take his mouse and click on the TeamSpeak Wentfield or whatever because he couldn't find it on the desktop. So we had a guy in this condition playing as our 5th until the final. And then when we made it to the final, Tommy lurppis called me like, "Hey, Nico was. I think he went to somewhere north to some summer cabin or something with his friends to fish and drink and whatever. Just couldn't give a crap about this tournament because how shitty he had been. So he just kind of decided he wanted to not come. So then we were playing with this guy who was literally out there. And I got a hold of him. I managed to tell him to make him come to play the final. He hadn't touched CS in 3-4 weeks or something. Also, this guy in his psychosis got super mad at me, by the way, and was making some pretty bad threats, but it had to be done. naSu comes in, hadn't touched CS. We went to the final. I think we lost the first map quite convincingly. And then we just demolished them on, I think, Train, and then win the third map. Maybe it was Inferno or something. And all of a sudden, we won the tournament. And I'm like, what the Like, how did we actually win this? Because we were absolute ass. That team was we were just dog shit. And they were supposed to just literally win us 16. I think Ruit even made like a statement in like an HLTV interview or something, or Gottfrag or whatever it was at the time, that they will beat us 16-0, 16-0. Or if we win a pistol, we might get to 3 rounds. And I was like, hey, that's fair play because we were actual shit. And then somehow we win this tournament. And then after, I realized that this team is not going to, like, with this fight, even though the Lightning did strike this time, it's not going to strike again. And we already seen how this team functions, or doesn't function, rather. So I already thought ahead and decided to make some changes. So I called Plaste, who I hadn't played before, but I knew good things about him. I got him, and then who else was Ruit from the Charlotte's lineup. So it was then like me plus the Ruit, naSu, and
I think Conte joined. I think maybe he joined as the 5th.
No, not Conte.
Okay.
Conte was standing in for me in one tournament.
Yeah, you're right. It was
China.
T-Hop. T-Hop was the 5th, yes.
Yeah. So we tried to like make a 5-man unit with enough skill, but also mental fortitude, and not have that many fiery people that would like do all this dumb shit that we've referenced to a bunch of times, and to try to make it work, which it sort of did. We didn't have any super results, and then eventually everyone went to the army, so we didn't even get to try only a few months. But yeah, it was quite that assembly especially was quite the memory.
I've got a couple of questions about this team, though. So when you did go to the World Cyber Games, obviously, and before you even made the playoffs, there's a story. And when I tell you, you will remember it, but you might not remember it now, which is this is fucking ridiculous. It's only because you told me this. It's such a good story. I remember it, which was in the group stage. If you remember what World Cyber Games were like, groups were ridiculous. You'd sort of have like 1 or 2 good teams. You'd have like literally teams from every possible country that you've never heard of. And essentially, because you just played them in BO1s, there's actually times when good teams didn't even qualify. You got upset, or, sometimes it'd be easy to just wreck everyone, 16-4, whatever. And in this group stage, which you got out in second, right? And what happened was you were playing a game. I think you were playing, let me just double check. Yes, at the end of the group, right? You played a team from, I think they were from New Zealand or something. They were called like, yes, they were from, is it New Zealand? Australia. They were called Sequential Gaming. And it turns out, right, you actually drew this game and you ended up getting out from a draw. But what you didn't know at the time in the game, Natu, was it was one of those ones where, because it was like a round robin group, it was going to also be based, if you hadn't tied, you wouldn't have gotten out. And also it was something like, it might even have been like round difference or something. And you told me something like you weren't, because back then, like the rules were complicated. No one read the rule book. Your team, you said, didn't know this in the game though. And so supposedly in this game, I think you even said like you didn't even know if you had to win it. So you were like fucking around. I think you even said like you maybe even had shotguns in this one as well or something. In the end, or scouts or something. And in the end, you tied it. It didn't matter. You got through. But it's like a classic one of those ones where it's like, afterwards someone goes like, "Oh, you must be glad you just made it through." You're like, "What do you mean? Like that counted? Like that's like this is the sort of ridiculous shit in the old school of esports, isn't it?"
Yeah. I mean, back in those days, we were not so like you mentioned, not so well versed when it comes to the rule books. I don't think the players are necessarily nowadays either, but they have managers and management that do actually read them through. So, they're not that much more wiser than we were back in those days. But that sounds very plausible. I can't remember that exactly, but it does sound like us. It does sound like a Counter-Strike team that is overconfident and thinks that something's already happened when it hasn't. And especially like when we were playing against teams from these regions that we knew were just like a few levels below us, so we typically went into those games with let's say a free mind, and kind of gave people the freedom to do some dumb shit because typically it worked. But I think probably because of the fact that we thought it was already clear that we were going to go through, we took it to an extreme level instead of the normal insanity that would have happened in that game otherwise.
And then the other detail is, even though if someone looks it up, it's not going to look that good because it's going to be like, oh, you came like 9th place. You played again the polls that end up winning the tournament, and it was a 3-map series.
Oh, gosh.
This is one of those ones where it's like a what if, right? What if you win that one?
Yeah. Again, another one we talk about every now and again with, I think, naSu and Plastef spoke about this a few times. A game where it went to a 3-mapper and we were up after a pretty solid T side, but then they beat us like, I don't know, I can't remember the score, but it was like a very, very close, good game. And they went on to win the whole thing. They beat, I believe, Fnatic in the finals of the WCG. But for sure, one of those what-if moments in my career. But I think if it was any other Finnish lineup at the time, I don't think we would have... We wouldn't have been that close with them because those guys were insane and they could come back. They could do so many insane things in CS at the time that I think if we had some of those guys we had in the previous teams, I think they would have probably lost the plot at some point and took out the shotguns and we would have lost much earlier. So if you put that into the context, a very close game where a couple of things gone our way, maybe we could have been the ones to take it all the way.
Give me some thoughts on naSu then, Leppäsen's brother, because this was one of those people where, if anyone ever used to watch POVs back in the day, this is one of the best players to watch. He's a really good player.
Yeah. Also, like, I think in contention for me, having, of course, seen him up close and personal, how good he was mechanically speaking, I think he can be mentioned in the same sentence together with players like Neo, like Forrest, in terms of just raw mechanical skill, especially when it comes to movement. Holy crap, like once he figured out to use the mouse wheel as a jump button, like he used space for quite a while. And I think it was one of the boot camps we were having. Like we had these insane boot camps back in the day with that team, well with the 69N team, where we would spend like a week in a friggin' basement in Germany somewhere just playing like 12 hours a day. I think that's when he took it up on himself to start jumping in with the mouse wheel, and he upgraded his movement skill to a level that very few could match. Also, one of my favorite kind of teammates throughout my career. Like I played with him multiple times. Even like when he was already semi-retired, I would always kind of be like, "Hey, Nico, you wanna, one more ride?" It kind of just worked. Like the way when we were playing opposite side of maps, like he would tell me exactly what I needed to know and vice versa, and it just kind of worked. And also just extremely skilled. But again, I think it's just like his brother. If he was like, doing everything and anything to win, Nico was a bit more on the lazy side.
Yes.
He just wasn't the guy to put in the work, because like the amount of potential he had was that he could have had a legacy similar to the guys
Agreed.
I mentioned. Like he could have been like a Virgin Forest.
Probably should have been the best Finnish player ever if we grinded, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right, one thing that's funny is you obviously in early CSGO did play with them a little bit when you had that Curse EU, FI team, obviously, where you were the American brand Curse. If people don't know, in early CSGO when you were playing, well, this was obviously the era when NIP won those 87 maps in a row, and you were some of the victims along the way. So give me some thoughts. How good was NIP?
Yeah, no, they were on a different level to everyone else. I mean, I think just the combination of players they had and kind of colliding the two worlds of Source and 1.6 early on, just a perfect storm. And they knew how good they were also. So they were playing with this confidence that no one, like everyone was just scared of playing against them. We always had this joke. I think it was Allu who well, surprise, Allu who came up with this joke, like that we have to have Forrest on a leash. It's like, imagine Forrest is like a puppy, always wants to run around. You keep him on a leash, everything is good. The moment you let him off the leash, you're screwed. And that's exactly what always happened. It felt like Forrest was just deleting us from the map every single time we had any kind of opportunity to win anything. I think we came pretty close though. Like there was one map that was actually pretty close in the Thor Open thing. But aside from that, typically they were fairly one-sided affairs when we played against those guys.
Let me ask about Allu then, because obviously the strange thing about Allu's career was he only came along at the very end of 1.6, so there was only the lurppis team he could play in basically, and then he was actually pretty good in early CSGO, but obviously famously it wasn't until he got to NIP he got like the big fame now, and obviously now everyone knows him as a household name, because this guy's a really interesting, unusual person to me, Natu, because not only is he a very good player, people have seen that in the server, but he has these different sides to his personality. Like on the one hand, he can do the Finnish thing of like, stone-faced, no emotion. His voice is even the most ridiculous. Like, it sounds like AI or something. Like, yeah, it's very good. It's like the most insane Finnish accent ever. But he's that guy where if he makes a joke or if you make him laugh, the second his smile, dude, he light up a whole room. You know what I mean? Like, he has a really crazy part to his personality.
Yeah, and I think a guy with many sides, and most people haven't seen like majority of his personality, because I think he kind of put up like an act of a like he kind of made this role earlier on in his career. He kind of wanted to seem like similar to a Kimi Räikkönen, not specifically, but
no, it felt like that vibe though. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But like in person, he was always very talkative and sometimes a bit blunt. But you got used to it. It was just a part of his persona. But a super fun guy to hang around with, especially when he started growing up a bit. I remember like as a kid, like I remember playing against him at these gather tournaments we used to call Arena in Finland. We used to have those, and he was always there playing, and he was this little young kid, with a thick hair and just these janky ass flannel shorts, and just looked like a little grinder, and just extremely skilled. Very, very frustrating to play against. And I remember playing with him in the first times I played with him, it was the early CSGO, right? So I remember like the amount of potential I could already see. Then it's like, okay, this guy can do big things if he just finds the balance of when to be aggressive. Like, don't be the Ruit kind of a guy who just always keeps on going for for the next skill and the next skill. And I think once he started to kind of find that rhythm is when he peaked. I think for me, like one of the early really, really good kind of hybrid operas where he could play really passive, but then when he had his moment, he could be all over your face and just like kind of instantaneously win around for your team.
One thing I want to ask about is, obviously, you now are in ENCE, the big org. There's a real esports team with sponsors. It's all good and so differently. If people don't know, though, there's a really weird story which you can explain to me. We did some of this in some of the talk to Thorin, but I'll cover it briefly here, which is basically ENCE just started as a team initially, and you were in it, and then after that, a bunch of people were in it early, and then after that, when, I think it was when natu left or whatever, then when allu left, then you were out of that, and you were in like 3D Max and other squads, and then you came back later. And so what was the story with that?
I believe it was 2013 DreamHack Summer. I was there out of kind of random, like I think lurppis recommended me to DreamHack to fill in as a caster because I was semi-retired. Like I hadn't announced anything like that I'd retired, but I'd taken some time off from playing or competing. I was just kind of focusing on my real life work and whatnot. And it was that tournament. I think it was Allu and Sonny who came to me like trying to sweet talk me into like making a team or something. And at first I was like, I can't be fucking bothered. We've gone through this so many times. Like, how many times do we need to do this? And then for whatever reason, I get back home, we start playing a bit, and it starts feeling like it's fun. And then next thing you know, we have a team. I think we were first called 4W, like something Walla Walla, something blah blah blah, just like a random name. And then ENCE was an organization and was a company already back then, established by a bunch of people, one of which is still like the chairman of the board at ENCE and then still like the biggest shareholder. They started ENCE and they had a CS team with actually Dream, who I used to play with, and then there was Shaker, who still actually plays with this kind of a fun team. And so on. So I think Sonny was also part of the first team as well. That team disbanded in like the first 2 months or whatever. And so then Petri, the biggest shareholder of ENCE and the chairman of the board, knew me. And I think he called me up or something like, hey, would you guys be interested in jumping in? And we were like, may as well. And that's how we ended up in ENCE. Wasn't more complicated than that, but for whatever reason, Allu and Sonny managed to kind of talk me into getting back into it when I already had the thought in my head that maybe it's time to kind of ride it to the sunset and stop competing.
What was it like to play with Sonny? He was kind of obvious as the next up and comer, right?
Yeah. Skill wise, always very, very, very talented. I think overthinker. He was always an overthinker. I think. In some sense, maybe his demise in his Counter-Strike career was maybe he was overthinking 2 steps ahead. We were going through players like they were breakfast cereal throughout that year we were in ENCE. Like I think we went through like 20 players or something. And it was mostly just like, I think Sonny and Allu maybe just going through them and then telling me we're going to be changing this player. And then me going to Petri and telling him, oh, yeah, by the way, there's going to be another roster change in the team. This is a time when we had like players like Joel's, the notorious stand-in, had a bunch of different people disturb this and that, like basically all of Finnish Counter-Strike went through. Yeah, very, very skilled player. Sonny was a very, very skilled player. It was evident that if he put his mind into it and find the right focus and stops overthinking too much, I think it was always evident to me that he could make a career out of it. I think it was the right choice for him once he, I can't remember what year it was, but when he went to Penta to play international to kind of see outside of the Finnish CS circle, because it felt like it was socially too easy for him to kind of juggle around on things. And then when he was always thinking of ways to improve the team, and it typically involved picking up another player, I don't think he could have that kind of luxury in an international environment. So that's helping him as in his career was the right move, which eventually led him to be in Mouse, right? So yeah.
What about later on, like I said, you played in the 3D Max lineup, and you actually got to play at a major. You played at ESL One Katowice 2015. Like, you didn't do well. Like, you had like fucking VP and TSM in your group, so you're not supposed to. But I would just say this: I think it's a cool way to put like a cap on the playing career. That like you were playing in a major in 2001, and you played one in 2015. That's pretty fucking good longevity.
Yeah, I mean, not many people have had even the opportunity to have that kind of longevity, right? It's only a handful of people who have been playing. As you could maybe put someone like Forrest in the similar, who's played like in early and in late, maybe a couple others. But yeah, for sure. I mean, fun fact: I never got to play the qualifier because, of course, 1 year earlier we had this. Me and my wife decided to get married. Valentine's Day 2015, and of course that same weekend happened to be the qualifiers for the major. Luckily, the team made it through. It was actually funny. We had the wedding on Saturday, and we were playing the qualifier on Sunday. So I was home watching, and it was the most horrible thing to watch those games as well. And it was the time when Allu was still in the team, right? And he was playing really, really well. Xarte also, he was the stand-in for me. He also, especially in the last game, he was playing lights out. And the guys did the job. And that's when we lost Allu after, right? If I'm not mistaken with the timeline.
Yes, you went to NIP.
To NIP, yeah. So of course, like if we had been able to keep the lineup we had, could be a very different story. And also, it's one of those what ifs. Also, is that team like if we could have had the time to actually compete, because we put a lot of sweat and thought into putting that 5-man unit together. We just never really had the chance to play aside from a couple of a month or maybe 2 months tops. But the major itself, I don't think we went there with too many high hopes because we had quite limited practice time to play. And then, as you said, the group we were put in was, like a group of death, basically. Like, it would have had to be a massive upset for us to go through that group.
I thought one last question, because that's the end of the playing career, basically, is if people don't know, you did in 2015, when Allu was in an IP, get to coach an IP. I mean, this is very, very early on in the concept of a coach. So, like, I'm guessing this time it's a little bit more like being a demo analyst and helping the team out a bit, right?
Yeah. That was actually that major in Katowice where Get Right approached me because they needed a new coach. And I was like, I'm interested. And that's when I decided that I will hang it up, my playing career. I think I still played like 2 tournaments or something that we still had left from prior. Was it like a Pro League final and another one? I can't remember which one. We played those and then I hung it up and jumped in. But for sure it was I look at it retrospectively that I wasn't ready for that gig whatsoever. I should have had a more kind of a transition period to kind of put myself in the right mindset. And also jumping to coach a team like NIP wasn't Jesus, like that's what a first gig to go and go coach a team that already has such deep roots on how they like to think about the game and how they like to play the game. So it was super tough to try to, first of all, even find the gap to try to renew the playbook. We tried to do that, but because we kept going to tournament, we never really got into it. But still, I look at it as a great experience. It was great to get to really know these guys, legendary players, and it's cool to be able to call them friends. But from a professional standpoint, I wish there was more time between quitting as a player and then transitioning into a coach to really like put my mind into it, and also having more time with the team to actually make a difference.
After this, basically, you were with me on the desk and other events, etc. Yeah, you would do some business stuff. ENCE was getting set up over the years. And then I noticed, like, a bit like I was a journalist on the side, that I would do some events. You were doing just whatever events were available. You did a couple of majors. You did many. I mean, if people don't know, even a few years back, you still did the Finnish ones, etc. What have you thought of being an analyst? Do you think it suits you?
Yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun. I think it was a natural progression. Like, I was always comfortable being in front of the camera, and I loved Counter-Strike. I loved talking about Counter-Strike. So it kind of felt like it was a match made in heaven. And also knowing you and knowing Richard and especially the old school guys. I've known you guys for a long time. So being able to kind of hang out with you and do the stuff with you guys like you, it felt like a no-brainer to try to see and pursue. It was fun, but then also like if we fast forward 3-4 years, it also started to put a strain on me because I was, having kids, having family, and everything, and being traveling as much as we had to. It just felt like is this worth anymore? Like, am I like I'm putting my real life at a second place? Of course, I mean it was work. I was paying bills, right? So fair enough. But I also felt that there has to be other ways also to do it aside from being on the road for 150 whatever days we were in the worst case.
Obviously, like I referenced, I'll actually link it in the description. We did actually talk to Thorin interview about ENCE and building the teams up and getting all the Alexi B lineups and getting kicked up. So that's all there, guys. We don't need to go over that. It's all good. So I thought at the end, we'll just do this mainly about the playing career and a little bit of coaching. At the end of this interview, do you have a final message? What do you think of your playing career? Do you want to thank anyone or say hello?
Ooh. I mean, I think a lot. I think we mentioned so many of the people that I would want to thank. I had so many amazing teammates. Like I said, I feel, even though I'm jealous of the pros of today, of what they have in terms of not like salary, whatever, but like in terms of the facilities, in terms of all the help they have, so they can be the best versions of themselves. I was always the kind of guy that when I was thinking back to my days versus what they have nowadays, that I could sense when I was on it, when I was playing my best. But I could never figure out how I could put my mind into that right mindset every single time I was playing. And now that I know, today's CS, how much help these guys have, I wish I would have had the tools to really take every inch out of myself. As we've said many times, I was always the kind of guy who wanted to do all the effort and everything. So, but still, I loved my playing career, and it was a big part of my life, defining me, who I am as a person. Playing Counter-Strike, I can easily say saved me, because as we talked about, losing my parents as a teenager, Counter-Strike was my savior, and also became my career. And I'm thankful for it, and I'm thankful for myself for being a guy who took the opportunities and kind of didn't get scared of jumping into the unknown many times. But yeah, just thanks to everyone who I've been interacting with throughout the years. I mean, unbelievable memories, great teammates, and now it's another chapter that's going on. Let's see how long this one goes on, and what comes next. Who knows?
Kiitos. Everyone needs a support network, and mine is, of course, my Patreon community, the Scrominati, who in many ways, they're the Sonny to my Cher, saying, I got you, babe. So this video and all the others on my channel were kindly supported by the following names: Ahmed Haju, Matt Pugnaccio Rakula, Adam Tomlin, Animosity, Jensen Go, Tosh, Toucan, and you know it. Jerky's Minion, my main man, always going to be referenced, one of the best patrons of all time. Would you like to ask a question in my AMA? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest to say on my channel? Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming Reflections and Talk to Thorin interviews are. Maybe you want to do one of those long discussions where you get to set the topics we talk about. Well, if any of these or others appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Scluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.